Tell me you didn't pick this place just so you could play that stupid game.
No, I picked this place so we could play this stupid game. This gang shit's got you a little stressed out. You need to relax.
By playing skee-ball.
Oh, yeah.
You know, most people just smoke pot.
Right. And then they go play skee-ball.
The core members of the Saints, aka the members that remain a constant, like the boss, Johnny, Pierce, Shaundi, and Kinsey. Now think of the Saints not as a gang, but as one being. Can you pin each of these core members in a place where they fit most? Of course, someone like Kinsey is the most obvious, as she is the brains of the Saints in modern times as they deal with enemies who rely more and more on technology. The boss can be seen as the heart of the Saints since they're the leader of the gang for the rest of the series, constantly beating to keep the entire body going. Johnny is another obvious one as he's the brawn and the strength of the Saints, considering his status as an unstoppable force. Pierce is another obvious placement considering that the series has outright proclaimed him to be the face of the Saints. Everything concerning the public image of the Saints falls to Pierce, to the point their brand going against them is his biggest fear. So now I ask you, where does Shaundi fit into this? Sure, you can jokingly say she's the crotch or the chest because of her status as somewhat of a sex symbol in the Saints Row universe. One coming from her quirk of having many exes, which evolved to I Wanna Sleep with Shaundi, a raunchy dating show in which Shaundi was a person of desire. In the Saints Row universe, I can see this being somewhat like the VH1's Of Love series like Flavor of Love and Rock of Love, as well as many of its spin-offs. However, while this is a somewhat fair assumption, I don't think it's right given Shaundi's role in the series, especially after Saints Row 2. In my opinion, Shaundi's place in the Saints is vital as she represents what the Saints, both the gang and the series itself, seemingly left behind. Strap in or mute up, cause we're getting into some broken record territory, but it's important for what I'm rambling about, so just bear with me for a second, okay? I'd also like to preface this by saying I don't hate Saints Row 3 and 4, there is just a considerable hollowness when thinking about these two games in comparison to Saints Row 2. Let's start off with the little things. The details that would go unnoticed, but when you see them, it makes you have a bigger appreciation for the game. Saints Row 2's Stillwater felt lived in. When leaving your character idle for too long near another group of NPCs doing an activity, your character will often take part. Oftentimes you'll see NPCs cuddled up with each other and sometimes they will say the wildest shit.
Seriously, we can't have any more kids until one of them dies.
What? When attacking the NPCs, they'll either run away or fight back with their bare hands, mace, or any other types of small weapons that make sense for a citizen of a place like Stillwater to have. This even extends to even the NPC gangs, as the Rodent will come at you with swords while the Somni could come at you with machetes. It would only escalate to a gunfight if you escalated it to a gunfight. As a player, you feel more connected to Stillwater because the game gives you incentives to explore Stillwater outside of an obligation to simply have every inch of the map be uncovered. I think about the many activities Saints Row 2 has to offer, which takes you as the player to different parts of Stillwater and interact with different NPCs a plethora of times. Even the intro cutscenes for these activities better connect us with Stillwater and its citizens. The reason you're even doing these activities to begin with are to upgrade your character with things like unlimited stamina. You're incentivized to enjoy the world that the devs built. Compare this to the NPCs and activities of Saints Row 3 and 4's Stillport, which are
nothing.
Stillport is all style, no substance. The same can be said for something even more major like the story elements of the three games. Let's talk about death in the Saints Row series for a second, alright? Two major ones in particular. The death of Carlos and the death of Shogo. The main theme being death and how Saints Row 2 handles it. Now, Carlos's death is heartbreaking because of how the story built his character and his character arc. Sure, he did deserve that type of death morality-wise, but story-wise, this death was done right. You basically assign Carlos to gather intel on the Brotherhood, and he's really eager. Throughout the arc, we as the player come to find out that Carlos is not exactly made for this position, but he is trying, and we appreciate it. It all culminates with his death at the hands of the Brotherhood in retaliation for the boss scarring Meryl's face. Carlos's death didn't just hurt because he was a promising young saint, but because he paid the price for the boss's actions. Where Carlos failed, the boss succeeded, and where the boss succeeded, Carlos reaped the consequences. Moving on to Shogo. I mentioned in my enemy gangs ranking that Shogo's death is probably one of the darkest moments in the series, and that's because it allows the grief and negative emotions to simmer rather than undermine it with some snappy comeback. Johnny's trying to mourn the death of Aisha, his touchstone, only for the person that ordered her hit to show up in an attempt to kill him and the boss. The scene of him beating Shogo is unbroken seriousness. As the player, this moment and how Gat feels is just allowed to happen. The game is not worse off for it. It literally helps elevate the story and the characterization of Gat. It's the human touch. It's allowing the characters to be characters and not just one-hit wonder character quirks. This is something missing from Saints Row 3, but admittedly does make a slight reappearance in Saints Row 4. In fact, its reappearance is in thanks to a Johnny scene, and especially Shaundi. We're first introduced to Shaundi in Saints Row 2 in the mission 3 Kings, where you have to do a task for Pierce, Shaundi, and Carlos in order for them to join the Saints. Shaundi's task in particular having you do some stunts with her car, from the jump telling you that she's a different vibe than the other characters, who had you get involved with some violent situations. At a very basic level, her appearance in-game comes off as Lynn's replacement for the role of the girl in the group full of masculine energy. Again, it's a very basic level troping of her character and her place within the Saints, as it's much different from Lynn's. This didn't stop her character from being oversimplified by a lot of fans who honed in on her character quirk being that she had a lot of exes. Granted, the payoff to what was being built up hadn't come to fruition yet, but when we did start seeing a more fleshed out version of Shaundi, it was met with a little backlash. Saints Row 3 would introduce us to a cleaned up Shaundi. Not just her appearance, but her attitude change, which was a given considering she stopped smoking weed constantly. The backlash was really nothing more than some gamers not liking change and growth, even if it makes sense considering the story. The Saints were not some Stillwater street gang anymore. They were a brand that had an image to maintain. Even Johnny is hinted at to be subject to this change. Funny enough, what a lot of Saints Row fans end up missing about the series is in Shaundi, the character that gets backlash for being serious or having more serious arcs pertaining to her own individual story. Something that we, as the player, get to bear witness to from Saints Row 2 up until Saints Row 4's How the Saints Saved Christmas DLC. So let's get into it. While she herself probably won't admit it to the people close to her, Shaundi can be defined by her insecurities, comparing her battle skills to that of other Saints and becoming disheartened that she doesn't really match up in her eyes. This is showcased in bits and pieces in Saints Row 2. In the 3 Kings mission of Saints Row 2, I mentioned that the task she has for you is different and less confrontation heavy than Carlos and Pierce's task, as she merely has you do a couple of stunt jumps for the good times. This lets us know that Shaundi is going to be a different type of saint in comparison to the other saints we have met to this point. As the player though, we know that this doesn't mean she's useless story-wise, as there are many occasions of her providing intel needed for the Saints to act against the Somni as well as Ultor. Shaundi doesn't see this though. Often when people are comparing themselves to others, they will fail to see where they shine the best. After all, you can't judge a fish by how well it climbs a tree. Something Shaundi doesn't learn, which allows for these bouts of self-doubt to fester as much as they do throughout the series. Going back to Saints Row 2, it's easy to find the moments that cater to this state throughout the game. Starting off with when she's first given the task of gathering intel on the Somni, something she's not too keen on, which does remind us of Troy in Saints Row 1, when he was tasked with gathering intel on the Vice gangs. Troy's reason being that he was undercover cop and facing a gang that had many cops on their payroll wasn't gonna end well. Shaundi's reasoning being that not only does she used to date a member of the Somni veteran child, but also because she does hold some fear of them, even warning the boss about them. While there is the fact that she forgot about the drug farm from her time dating veteran child, I don't think it matters as much as when she's kidnapped by veteran child. Instead of fighting something that other members of the Saints would do, she tried to run and ended up being used as a meat shield for veteran child during the mid-boss fight. This subject comes up again at the end of the Somni arc after the boss kills the general. Shaundi simply asks how she did, which comes with a bit of poking fun, as when it came to fighting, Shaundi didn't really do much on that end, which is the end she's focusing on. She doesn't ask how she did in terms of helping take down the Somni through intel, especially in finding the general in the first place. Like, Shaundi, this plan was so genius, of course you did amazing. Later on, during the Ultor saga, while many of the central saints like the boss, Johnny, and Pierce all defend themselves to a varying degree, Shaundi is, once again, just straight up kidnapped and has to be saved. While there's no real comment on it from Shaundi during this most likely also fed into the issue. The next time we see Shaundi, she's sporting a new look and attitude in Saints Row 3. Saints Row 3's development seems to have been going through a lot and different things got cut, it seems. One being an arc centering on Shaundi where she's dealing with the depression and survivor's guilt aftermath of Johnny's death. This information is pretty much a rabbit hole that comes to a dead end as the last source is a deleted post, but given what we see of Shaundi's character in the game, I think that one's got some truth to it. Shaundi's labeled as a nag, but let's be honest, she has a right to be pissed off about a lot of things that unfold in Saints Row 3. Let's get back to the topic of death, shall we? One of the first major things to happen in Saints Row 3 is the death of Johnny Gat. And yeah, now we know he wasn't dead, but Saints Row 3 gave us a zombie, and that's always a death, so for now, Johnny is dead. While opinions may vary, personally, I feel that Johnny's death wasn't properly handled. Regardless if the end result was, yeah, Johnny was gonna die in this game, or yeah, Johnny was always gonna be MIA after the intro, to the characters, he was meant to be dead to them. However, the only person that actively seemed to care about the whole ordeal was Shaundi. The boss never really mentions how this affects them, or we never really see anything different about their behavior until Saints Row 4 through the Johnny romance option and their reaction to going to get Johnny. The boss is really only shown to care about Johnny's death at face value, and in Saints Row 4, the bouts of anger or hope that Johnny's alive feels so hollow because there was never that exploration of exactly how badly this affected the boss, especially considering I'm pretty sure that the boss and Johnny are meant to be best friends. Of course, you could simply look at it as boss only wanting to avenge Johnny's death, but nothing else. Except that later on in the game, they seemed like they wanted to honor his legacy, but that gets thrown out real quick. Before his death, Johnny lamented the fact that the Saints weren't who they used to be. With their partnership with Ultor, they had long since left behind their humble, or as humble as you can get when it comes to the criminal underworld, lifestyle and become random celebrities. Like, when you think about it, I'm pretty sure the Saints are the equivalent of social media influencers where you're just sitting there wondering, like, why exactly are they famous again? Like, aside from Pierce and Shaundi, what does everyone else do to warrant fame? It's like one of those hype house or YouTube houses or whatever those things are called. Of course, before Johnny could divulge what he wanted from the Saints from this revelation, he is killed. Off screen, no confirmation scene, just a gunshot, the sound of Shaundi's heartbreaking, and we're thrust out of the plane. Shaundi's behavior is more showcased during the Morningstar arc, as it's the arc where the Saints are actually trying to specifically kill one of the people that had a hand in Johnny's death, Philippe Loen. Her nagging behavior is honestly 100% justified through this arc. Grief comes in many forms, but with the Saints, anger is the most popular form. But what makes Shaundi's grief different from, say, the boss's grief with Carlos's death, or Johnny's own grief over losing Aisha? Well, at first, I was gonna say it's because the Volition writers wanted to explicitly dive deeper for a character like Shaundi that's not as battle-hardened as the Saints like the boss and Johnny and Pierce. And while that can also be the case, I think legacy is a more fitting and satisfying answer. To me, at least. Shaudi's not really just mourning Johnny's death. She's mourning a legacy left behind that will not really be honored in a way that she sees fit. While anger makes up a lot of Shaundi's grief, there's also this aura of overcompensation. Pierce even somewhat mentions it, telling her that she doesn't get messy, implying that since their new heights of fame, Shaundi was more of a figurehead alongside Pierce, but did get involved with gang shit from time to time, as seen with the first mission of Saints Row 3. This is where her intense desire to constantly act comes in. She's driven by vengeance, which overcomes her plan-first nature, and any plan that doesn't involve, let's kill them now, is going to be met with backlash from her because it's not taking on the problem immediately, the problem being the Syndicate. Between Zemos and Pierce throwing a party like a week after Johnny's death, and Viola becoming a member of the Saints with no type of repercussions other than her sister dying, which was more Killbane rather than the Saints, and more Kiki's punishment as she was the one who stood up to Killbane the most. Added in with the fact that none of the other Saints seemed to share her sentiment or sympathize with her, this added to Shaundi's already built-in insecurities in a really negative way. However, after a certain point, Shaundi's appearance in the game is minor, so this grief of hers is left on a cliffhanger of sorts, or it could just be assumed that she found her own way to deal with it, since it's several years later when it comes to Saints Row 4. The next time we see Shaundi, she's a part of the international assassination mission to kill Cyrus Temple. When Kinsey suggests that the boss is going to sacrifice themselves and tells everyone to say their goodbyes, Shaundi expresses her gratitude for the boss taking a chance on her. Later, when the boss is president, Shaundi is put as the director of the Secret Service. Shaundi in Saints Row 4 is essentially the culmination of everything and every aspect of her character throughout the entire series, starting with the most crucial moment of her arc, that being when she's unknowingly the next target for being rescued. I say unknowingly because Shaundi wasn't the one the boss intended to go for when they picked up the plane signal. The boss incorrectly assumes that the worst moment of Johnny's life was dying on that plane. Like, okay, fuck what happened to Aisha, right, boss?
Gotta save Ish.
It's soon realized that this is not Johnny's nightmare, but Shaundi's, and everything I just talked about comes together. In one of the more serious cutscenes of the series, Shaundi lays it all out concerning her feelings about everything that went down on the plane. Saints Row has a lot of scenes I love, and this is one of them.
Johnny, I let you down. I let us all down. We never should have ran. We should have stayed and fought, but we couldn't because of me. And I know people say it's not my fault, but if the boss didn't have to protect me, you would be standing here right now. I'm so sorry, Johnny.
In Saints Row 2, Shaundi is this woman who simply goes with the flow, seemingly unencumbered by life inside of a gang. In Saints Row 3, her grief causes her to be guarded and angry most of the time. And now, in Saints Row 4, since being kidnapped, there is no show. No walls, no snapping at anyone. Then again, there is no one making light of her feelings. The small heart-to-heart between the boss and Shaundi after she's taken again makes everything even more clear on how Shaundi views herself, with the boss reassuring her that it's really not how everyone views her, but her own doubt has had the loudest voice for the longest. We even get more of Shaundi's inner turmoil after the virtual veteran child fight, this time in the body of her Saints Row 2 self. The go with the flow front very present in this old version of Shaundi, a version that new Shaundi isn't fond of. At this moment, Shaundi isn't fond of how she used to be and is lashing out. Throughout the game, most interactions with Shaundi in the virtual stillport end with her having old Shaundi as a tag-along. The relationship between the two is rocky at first. Shaundi wants nothing to do with her younger self. It's a battle of acceptance. A lot of people run away from their past, whether it's their past actions or past behaviors. We all do it in some form or another. That's why we all have that one memory of us doing something really embarrassing and it hits us like a fighting muffin in the chest. Shaundi's not hating on old Shaundi for no reason. It's because she's not really all that proud of who she was in Saints Row 2. However, running away from who you were usually isn't the healthy answer. Especially if you're someone who's worried about having the past come back to haunt you in some way, shape, or form. Like, real talk, I used to be one of those types of girls who thought shaming other girls for being girly made me better than them. I even had a hotep phase. Acknowledging that this is who I was at one point of my life was helpful in figuring out the type of person I didn't want to be. In having to deal with her old self, Shaundi is able to confront what exactly she was upset about. And if you've been paying attention this far, it's every aspect of herself that she deemed useless. Hanging out with her old self allows Shaundi to see herself in the same way that a lot of other characters do, as well as many of the fans. I think it makes it easier for her to connect with her old self and lose some of the hostility. Them getting to know each other is mostly seen through the mission Psychosomatic, where they take down a virtual version of Veteran Child together. I mean, the boss is there too, but I'm not talking about them right now. When it comes to the main game of Saints Row 4, that's about it with Shaundi's arc until we get to the DLC of How the Saints Save Christmas. It's through this DLC that we get more insight into Shaundi's past through the Christmas text adventure. In it, Shaundi reveals she had a lonely childhood, one where her parents and siblings were always away, busy with work and school. Shaundi was fine with that because no matter how busy they were, Christmas was always a special occasion for them. However, at some point, Shaundi's siblings got older and moved out, while her parents ended up getting a divorce. Learning of this about her past wraps everything in a nice little bow as it tells us where the Shaundi from Saints Row 2 comes from. Saints Row 2 Shaundi is a Shaundi that's dealing with some childhood neglect through some terrible coping mechanisms, and honestly, same dude. I also like to point out how Shaundi essentially wanted to do right by her old self and wanted her to have a proper Christmas. I thought it was really cute because, like, who doesn't just want to go back and do right by their younger selves? Like, give them a hug because they fucking need it. How the Saints Save Christmas is really a Shaundi-centric DLC that helps fully realize a character a lot of people doubted because she matured. And it's really sweet that it ends with the boss asking Santa to give Shaundi whatever she wanted. Boiling all of this together, Shaundi is literally the most relatable Saints Row character. Whereas all of the characters come off as larger than life in their own way, Shaundi is a character that is just easy to relate to once you understand why she is or why she acts the way she does. Of course, she's larger than life in her own right, but it doesn't take away from what I just said. Shaundi is the soul of the Saints, the humanity that keeps them from being silly little zombies. She's vital in a way that can go unseen, but once you see it, it gives you a better appreciation for her presence. Writing this script, it's kind of hard not to feel like Shaundi was the devs' favorite character, considering just how much thought was put into her. Even if the original visions changed, the goal kind of stayed the same. Shaundi ends up being the most fleshed out character in the entirety of the Saints Row series. I was not able to appreciate her as a kid because I was in a group that thought Shaundi was now terrible, but as an adult, Shaundi is fucking awesome, and kudos to the writers for her entire character arc. The entire point of this video was to shine a light on Shaundi's character because I feel like she's somewhat of an underdog when it comes to a good chunk of the Saints Row fanbase, who see her current self as somewhat of a downgrade. I wanted to extend some love to Shaundi and give her the flowers she deserved. Also, while not my intentions, I guess the video also showcased how the writers crafted something wonderful like this across several games. On a somber note, realizing this kind of makes me wonder if Shaundi is even going to be in the next Saints Row games. We don't really know any hardcore information and only theories and speculation, but some part of me feels that if it's a continuation after Saints Row 4, then Shaundi might not even be in it as her character arc is pretty complete compared to the others. Then again, it might not matter. The only thing to do is wait.